So what is persuasive speaking? So what is persuasive speaking and what makes a good persuasive speaker? According to the Greek philosopher Aristotle, one person can be more persuasive than another person. And this is because of ethos, the ability to convince the audience of your competence, your character, and your charisma, and your credibility. Logos, which is the ability to use logical proof to demonstrate the reasonableness of your arguments, and pathos, the ability to develop empathy and passion for others. So in this lecture, you'll learn varying viewpoints and your target audience, using evidence, making inferences, appealing to reason, arousing emotions, using 3 tenets of persuasion, ethical persuasion, avoiding fallacies, and finally, using a persuasive speech outline. So remember, your audience members are not necessarily unified in their thinking about controversial topics. Among your audience members, you'll have those who may have the same opinion as yours. You may have those who have opposing opinions, and you'll have the undecideds, the ones in the middle. The third segment should be your target audience, right? The undecided. So you definitely want to use evidence. Because your audience or your listeners are skeptical of unsupported generalizations, you must back your position with evidence. You can use facts and statistics to lay the groundwork for persuasion. You can use detailed examples to create interest. You can use testimonies from sources that your audience respects and that adds credibility to your position. Evidence changes audiences' judgments. So your initial credibility is your audience's perception of you before you speak. Derived credibility is your audience's perception of you while you speak. And terminal credibility is your audience's perception of you at the end of your speech. Now you may make inferences. An inference is a conclusion drawn from fact. So inferences is the way you connect the dots. You must assess the validity of your inference to make sure that it has a very high probability of being true. You also want to appeal to reason. An effective reasoning consists of a claim, which is a proposition. It consists of data, which is reasons or facts, or again, evidence. You have a warrant, which is logical and persuasive relationships between your claim and your data. You must have backing to support your warrant. Qualifiers, limits on the connection between the data and the warrant, and the rebuttal is potential counter arguments that you can refute or make sure that you can at least address. Now, there's also an appeal to reason, and as you probably know, there's deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, causal reasoning, and reasoning from analogy. When you use deductive reasoning, you offer general evidence that leads to a specific conclusion. Deductive reasoning takes the form of syllogisms, which are patterns to structured argument. So a syllogism has 3 parts: a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. So here are 2 examples. A major premise here is all men are mortal. Minor premise, Socrates is a man. So then the conclusion, Socrates is immortal. The second one here is the major premises. Plants need carbon dioxide to live. Now you can also use inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is your process from a series of specific observations to a more general claim. So here's an example. So inductive is derived from a general principle to a specific observation. So an example is all organisms are made of cells based on years of findings from biologists. We're going to next talk about deductive reasoning, which conversely would say if all organisms are made of cells and humans are organisms, then humans are made of cells. Causal reasoning is that unites two or more events to prove that one or more caused the other. So let's look at it. So here's an example. If you go to a party instead of studying for an exam, you might say that going to the party caused you to perform badly on the exam. Second example is an airplane crashes and the teams of experts study all the wreckage and other evidence to determine the cause of the crash. So reasoning from analogy is another way that you can convince your audience. When reasoning from analogy, we compare like things and conclude that because they are comparable in a number of ways, they also are comparable in other ways. Use these questions to check the validity of an analogy. Are the objects of comparison in the speech alike in essential respects? That is, are they more alike than they are different? Are the differences between them significant? So, here is an example. If you want to persuade a friend to watch a movie you enjoyed, the easiest way to persuade them may be to compare the movie to other movies that you know that they've watched. Using a comparison between something new and something known is an analogical reasoning where we draw conclusions by comparing two things. Now, arousing emotion is another way to convince your audience. And you'll notice that in a lot of ads, you'll find that the arousing of emotion is used greatly in public speaking. So we react most strongly when we feel angry, anxious, excited, concerned, or guilty. Speakers use pathos to instill the audience with attitudes and beliefs similar to their own, and to elicit a desired action. The greater your understanding of what your audience needs, fears, and aspirations are, the greater your chances of gaining their attention and of persuading them. Now let's look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Hopefully you've seen Maslow in other courses, maybe your psychology course, but Maslow determined that the most basic need is survival, followed by safety and the need to belong, the need for esteem, and then finally the need for self-actualization. When speakers use this appeal of the unmet need, it motivates the audience. Now let's look at the 3 tenets of persuasion. Sometimes you want to think small to avoid a big fall. You want to use the desire of consistency, and then don't put the best in the middle. Think small to avoid a big fall. So persuasion is traditionally a step-by-step process. So keep your expectations realistic. If you try to skip too many steps, or if you expect too much from your receivers, from your audience, then you may be disappointed in your results. Your receivers will be much more apt to change the way of thinking or their behavior if your requests are small. Now, you can also use the desire for consistency. One way to convince audience members to accept or act on your proposition is to demonstrate that a current situation has created an inconsistency in their lives, and that you can help them to restore the balance or the consistency. If a speaker can show why what is currently believed, thought, or does is out of sync with other attitudes and beliefs we hold or goals we value, then we are more likely to change as a request to restore our comfort or well-being. And then don't put the best in the middle. Don't bury the best of what you're trying to persuade your audience in the middle of your speech. Use both primacy and recency theories as guides when positioning key persuasive points. Either put your strongest point up front to win your audience members to your side early in your presentation, or put your strongest arguments last to build momentum as you approach the end of your speech. By positioning your arguments appropriately, you can be more persuasive. In order to be persuasive, you must avoid flawed arguments. Here are 12 examples, hasty generalizations, and you'll see the rest of them here. But as we continue, I'm going to give you examples of 2. So, a hasty generalization. Here's an example. Last month, my mailman was bitten by a Labrador retriever. And last week, I read in the paper that one attacked 2 children without provocation. So, it must be obvious that Labrador retrievers are vicious and should be banned from public areas. That is an example of a hasty generalization. And then the appeal to tradition is simply that, remember that phrase that you hear from sometimes older people, not always, that says, but we've always done it this way. I've been here for 10 years, and this is the way we do it, and that's the best way. Those are 2 examples of flawed arguments. So now that you've learned a little bit about how to perform a persuasive speech, here is a simple persuasive speech outline that you should use to develop your speech and to organize your speech. You begin with your attention getter, and your attention getter is what you use to draw your audience in. You may notice that your audience is on their phone or they're talking. In order to bring your audience in, you may give them a fact, you might give them a quote, you might give them a short video, it might be a picture, something that draws your audience in. Secondly, and this is just more about thought than it is about precisely what you're going to do with your audience, you must think about what is going to motivate your audience to listen. Or you may even tell them, here's why you should listen to this speech. Thirdly, you want to establish your own credibility. And that means in persuasive speeches especially, why are you credible to be able to talk about the specific topic? Then, fourthly, is your thesis statement. That is that one clear declarative statement that tells your audience precisely what the speech is about. And then you want to preview your speech. And the preview of the speech is to let your audience know what your speech is about. Next, you transition to your body of your speech. And remember to use transition words like to begin. Then you establish the problem. Then you establish the opposing viewpoints. Always establish the opposing viewpoints because it tells your audience that you know what are the thoughts, what are the opposing viewpoints to your particular viewpoint. You transition then to the call to action, and this is very important. A persuasive speech is not a persuasive speech unless you have a call to action. What is it that you want your audience to do about this? And you're going to tell them clearly. If it's that you want them to vote, you're going to say, you all need to go out and vote. If it is to eat better, to sleep better, to save the planet, whatever it is, you want to tell them precisely what you want them to do. And then you transition to your conclusion. and you want to summarize your main points. You want to reiterate your call to action. That's very important. And then throw it back to your attention getter, which means that you're closing the loop in your speech, and then you wrap it up. Remember to cite at least 3 reputable sources, and these citations should be included throughout the speech. This will help you to avoid plagiarism. So, remember to always use an outline and to speak extemporaneously. So in summary, in this lecture we addressed varying viewpoints and your target audience, using evidence, making inferences, appealing to reason, arousing emotions, using 3 tenets of persuasion, ethical persuasion, avoiding fallacies, and using a persuasive speech outline. Remember that a good public speaker, when using persuasion, balances ethos, pathos, and logos.